Embezzlement is on the rise, but only a few incidents ever get reported to law enforcement. Trusting someone is not an internal control to prevent the crime. Our guest today is Kelly Paxton. She has more than 25 years of investigation experience and is a certified fraud examiner and private investigator. She started a career in law enforcement as a special agent for U.S. Customs Office of Investigation in 1993. Ms. Paxton has worked white-collar crime, fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, and conflict of interest cases. Kelly is also the proud owner of pinkcollarcrime.com, a passion of hers about embezzlers in the workplace. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. Kelly, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Great. Can you tell me how you got involved in the investigation of embezzlement?
I will tell you, I have always been interested in money. And when I say money, originally my first career was finance, and it was kind of studying how people invest money. And then we had a client who went bad and was arrested for wire fraud. And so then I got interested in investigating why people steal money. And then sort of my third career is speaking about money and fraud and why people do it and how to prevent it. So it's kind of always been about money, but at the core of it is honest people steal. And that's what I'm fascinated with. I used to have a supervisor when I was a special agent with U.S. Customs, and he's like, when are you going to put in the arrest in the conviction statistic, in the system? And that never was exciting for me. What was exciting for me is finding out why they did it, and then also potentially returning the money to the victim. Mm-hmm. It was never about putting the person in jail. It was much more about why and, trying to make the victim whole.
Restorative justice. So that leads me to the question. So why do people steal?
People steal, I think, because we have short-term thinking. And Daniel Kahneman, famous behavioral economist, we have system 1 and system 2. And system 1 is the short-term, quick thinking. 2 + 2 is 4. Or, I've got this bill I've got to pay. I'm just going to pay it. And they think that money will really fix their problems. Long-term, it doesn't fix their problems. And you have the fraud triangle. You have opportunity, pressure, and rationalization. And most investigators will say that you can control for opportunity, which, yes, that's the easiest, most, part of the fraud triangle that you can measure. But you can also control a little bit for the rationalization part of the fraud triangle, because if you have a really crappy tone at the top, if you treat your employees poorly, or if they see you living out of the corporate checkbook, they are going to see what you're doing. And it's a lot easier to steal from someone if they are thinking that you as the boss is stealing from the government because you're not paying taxes, because you're writing off crazy expenses and things like that. And then with COVID, we have financial pressures that this country hasn't seen, I'm going to say, since the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And good people, I can't get out of bed in the morning if I think I'm going to be ripped off all the time. I think people, with the exception of narcissists and psychopaths, and I heard you had a specialist in narcissism on, but most people are good people, but life happens. And and most people think money fixes it.
So let's take a step back. Let's talk about what embezzlement is, and then we can talk about how to prevent it and why people are committing it and how.
Sure. So embezzlement is just asset misappropriation, stealing of money from business. I'm known as the pink collar crime lady, and most people think that's women committing any type of crime. But the definition is actually petty amounts stolen by low to mid-level employees, primarily women, from the workplace. And that was popularized by a criminologist. I didn't come up with that term. I'm not smart enough to come up with that term. In 1989 by Dr. Kathleen Daly. But I worked to try to bridge academia and criminology to, business, like Main Street business. And in 1939, a famous criminologist, Edwin Sutherland, came out with the term white-collar crime. prior to 1939, we thought of criminals as icky people. They were, lived across the tracks. But think of rich people who steal. And we're seeing this in COVID with the PPP program, the EIDL program. We're seeing, quote, wealthy, successful people steal. I mean, look at Bernie Madoff. But that was a big shift change in 1939 to say that people from a certain social status can be criminals.
Yeah, I mean, that was a fundamental shift. You used to think of crime was, break-ins, assault, things like that, and not just move a few zeros from one account to another.
Right. And, most people are going to be affected by suite, SUITE, so, office suite crime instead of street crime. But the problem is if you get your car ripped off or, say that you leave your car unlocked one night by accident and you go out the next morning and it's been rifled through or they've stolen it, are your friends going to say, well, you were an idiot for not locking your car? No, they're going to say, oh, my God, that's so terrible. But when you get embezzled in your business, you can't imagine the amount of victim shaming. You'll see stories and they'll say, how did that business owner manage to let $3 million walk out the door? They must not have been paying attention. The amount of victim shaming is kind of insane, which leads to a statistic of, and these statistics are a little wonky because we don't know what we don't know, but only 15% of embezzlement crimes are reported to law enforcement, supposedly. Why aren't, 8+ out of 10 not going to law enforcement? Shame and humiliation. If you get ripped off, and say you're a successful businessman, master of the universe, are you going to go to your buddies on the golf course and say, oh my God, that woman in accounts payable, she just ripped me off $3 million. No, you're embarrassed.
Yeah. Is some of it due to like family members being a part of the business? And now it's like, okay, well, my family members stole from me. I don't want them to go to jail. I just don't want them to steal any more money from me.
Well, that can be it, definitely. Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners are incredibly uncomfortable if you, as the business owner, have put, your favorite niece or nephew in prison. It makes it a little uncomfortable. But I will get business owners who will say, but they were my relative. And I have only had one business owner who was ripped off almost $500,000 say he did not like the person who stole from him. Mind you, he originally thought she only stole $400 and it turned out to be $450,000.
Oh my goodness.
Most victims like the employee, and that's how the employee is able to steal, because #trust is not an internal control. And they're always there. They don't take vacations. They're there before the owner gets in. They're there after the owner leaves. Well, part of the reason they're doing that is because they need that extra time to cover their tracks. But we hire people we know, like, and trust and think are capable.
Yeah. Okay. So let's, before we start getting to the people, is there a consistency like in the businesses, like something going on in the businesses that you see that are, I don't want to say they're necessarily targeted, but where you see embezzlement happening? Small businesses, big businesses, family businesses?
A crazy statistic, because everyone has a dentist, I would assume. 60% of all dentists get ripped off. So the next time you go to your dentist, after they have stuck their hands in your mouth and given you Novocaine, ask your dentist, hey, I heard this crazy statistic that 3 out of 5 dentists get ripped off. And if your dentist doesn't say anything, bingo, they are one of the 3 out of 5 who have been ripped off. So dentists, but I call embezzlement the crime of Main Street. It is the crime of smaller type businesses. The median loss for a business that has under 100 employees is almost twice the size as the median loss of a business that has over 100 employees. Because over 100 employees, you have processes, you have, maybe you have segregation of duties much more so than a small business. So embezzlement is really the crime on Main Street.
Gotcha. So it's almost the more people that are involved in looking at the finances, the more, oh gosh, I hate to say the word, the more bureaucracy there is. It's almost like inversely proportional to the amount that's taken.
Kind of, because you have, a lot of businesses say, I get audited. Well, audits are not the number one way that you find fraud or embezzlement. It's actually tips. So this is where, you need to listen to your employees. You need to listen around the water cooler. You need to look outside and see, I have a saying, the parking lot audit. If you have a $30,000 or $40,000 a year employee and they show up every year in a new Range Rover, we call that a clue.
Yes.
So, and hotlines. If you have a hotline, like a, alert line, those losses are smaller because people feel that they can anonymously turn someone in.
They don't want the person committing the crime, but they don't want to have to be the one who comes forward to report them.
Right. Because what if it's your boss?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that happens. That definitely happens. And, the higher up you are in an organization, the more you steal. So that's the other thing. The pink collar crimes, I said it was primarily women. 90% of bookkeepers in the United States, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics, are women. So I will get women that push back against my title of pink collar crime. They should be pushing back against the fact that women are in lower level positions as a whole. Mm-hmm. So it's just, don't push back at me, push back at the fact that society has women in lower level positions. And this is another thing that I, say in my presentations is I don't care how smart you are. I have an astronaut, nuclear physicist on the board of Boeing. He got ripped off $750,000 by his bookkeeper. Ugh. It doesn't matter where you are on the org chart compared to, say, that woman in, accounts payable. That's not a sign of intelligence. And there's no sign of intelligence with being able to embezzle. It's a sign of the systems and knowing how they work and where the holes are.
And kind of knowing whether people are actually monitoring the system.
Right. And so I don't have red flags. I have pink flags. And one pink flag is they never take vacations. Why don't they take vacations? Again, they can't miss work. There was a woman, crazy family story. Her name is Bernice Geiger. She stole, it took her 20 years to steal $2.15 million in the 50s and 60s from her dad's own bank. And the bank actually shut down. But so it's the equivalent of $17 million in today's sum. She did not steal it overnight. It took her 20 years. When she was arrested, she was exhausted. And why was she exhausted? Because she said she could never take a vacation because she never knew when someone was going to come and check the real set of books. So she goes to prison for 5 years. She gets divorced. She moves back into her parents' house, which I've told my children that's not happening. I am the pink collar crime lady. That would be bad. So she allegedly consulted for the precursor to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And what did she look for? People who weren't taking vacations. That's who she looked at.
That's so interesting that there's these weird, people are so busy trying to cover up the crime, and there's the fear of being caught that makes them look like they were a super diligent employee.
Oh, yeah. Another pink flag is control freak. So if they, don't want to upgrade the computer system, if they don't want consultants to come in, there's a reason, because the consultants are going to come in and go, why do we have this extra bank account? We thought we closed that a couple of years ago. Well, that's the bank account that they're moving all the money through. So another one of my hashtags is it's not rocket science. I'm not a CPA. I say I'm not, smart enough to pass the CPA exam, but I do know how to put these cases together. And the money is in the business and it goes to the suspect. It doesn't go from the business to Liechtenstein to Panama to cryptocurrency to the suspect. It's very much A to B. Maybe there's a C. But these cases are very paper intensive, receipts, invoices, things like that. It's not this cyber crime at all. It's pretty basic.
Is it usually just wire transfers to accounts that look like they're in the company's name, but they're not really in the company's name? Or is it cash or fake invoices?
The number one way according to the ACFE and another report that no longer is published, but the numbers are valid, is forged or unauthorized checks. So I will get a business owner who finds out what I do, and they'll say, I sign all my own checks. And I just smile, and they're like, okay, what does that mean? And it's like, do you sign all your own checks? And do you actually look at your checks that you've signed? Like, really pay attention to them. So there's a great story, and it's relatively recent. He's talking about it. Mark Cuban, Dallas Mavericks billionaire. He got his MBA and he started his first business, and he had $84,000 in the bank. And he said, I did everything that I was told to do in my MBA program. I signed the checks, I looked at the invoices. And then he goes, so I hand the checks signed to his assistant, whose name was Renee. And what she did was she took whiteout. And he goes, she very nicely left me $2,000. Oh. But he said it was, quote, the best thing that happened to him. And okay, not X-rated, but he goes, it made us get our shit together. Because he said it would never happen to him again. And, embezzlement is a terrible, terrible thing to happen. The whole, cheesy cliche saying, everything works for a reason. I've had clients who, they've been ripped off, and it's never good to be ripped off, but there has been good parts of it that have come out. And I had a client recently who got ripped off almost $500,000. And they reached out to one of their best customers who turned out he had been ripped off, and he's in the likes of, the Mark Cuban range. And because of that, he's really supported them and made introductions for them that they would have never gotten. So I'm not going to say it was a good thing, because they went through a year of really difficult. But in the end, they actually have gotten better customers. So yeah. You got to try and see the bright side of it.
Yeah, I think it's always, I would hope that most good businessmen, when things go wrong, they can analyze it and say, well, first of all, how do I prevent that from happening again? But how do I learn from that? And how can I apply it to other areas of my business? I had someone approached me as an advertiser, misrepresented who they were, and I ended up losing $10,000 with this individual. And part of my first thought process was, I'm going to go to war. I'm going to make this guy's life miserable. I'm not going to stop until I, make this guy's life miserable. And the good thing is I thought about it, slept on it, and realized, you know what, I'm just going to count this up as an expensive lesson. Like hiring the lawyer, the stress, the anxiety, the vitriol of going after this person is just like, okay, this is not worth it. I just need to have better processes in place. Okay, what are the processes that I'm going to create because of this lesson?
And I just listened to a guy who, on another podcast, who was ripped off in the 90s. He's still talking about it. And he has some amazing quotes that he said. But interestingly, what you just said, the principle of it with the principle does not pay the principal. So the principle of being ripped off doesn't pay, your loss. And he goes, I finally had to get over it. And clearly he's not over it. He's over the amount of money, but he's still talking about it. And I say in my third career that I have right now, I'm kind of a fraud therapist, because first off, I'm cheaper than lawyers. And my work is always done via lawyer, because I have to have the attorney-client privilege, work product privilege. And I'm cheaper than the lawyer. But at the end of the day, I will tell the business owner, get back to work, sell more widgets, sell more of your time. Money is replaceable. The trust is much more difficult to get over. And I mean, again, I get these people who find out what I do, and they'll tell me, oh my God, in the 1998 crisis, I lost all this money. And the money part they talk about briefly, but it's all those other feelings of shame, humiliation. How did I not see it? How can I trust again? That's the deeper kind of work of embezzlement. Money's replaceable.
Yep. I mean, we were talking about it before we started recording. That's kind of always been me being a small business owner. in my finances, that's always been something that I've had a very hard time addressing, is that trust issue of, well, if someone has access to my bank accounts, like, can I really trust and be entirely hands off with them and let them just do their job?
Right. I have a virtual assistant, and people are like, because I clearly have trust issues because I've worked with, this for a long time. And I say, I have a virtual assistant. And they're like, you have a virtual assistant? And I'm like, well, she's a VA, but she lives 5 miles from me. And, I know I could track her down and kill her if I need to. So, it's just kind of like, yeah. But the other interesting thing, which I said at the beginning, is honest people steal. I have defended and prosecuted criminals that I'd rather go out to happy hour with than some people I've worked with in jobs. Because the criminals I know are criminals and they made a bad choice. Whereas, coworkers, sometimes I didn't see the knife being stuck in my back, because you intuitively trust a coworker more than just a random person that you meet.
Yeah.
You kind of have to. I don't know if you've read the book recently, Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers, but it's fascinating. And we have to trust people. Like, what if you went into your dentist and he says, or she says, you have a cavity? Do you believe them, or do you say, prove it?
Yeah.
No, we believe them. Like, we couldn't go through our life if we don't believe people. But the problem is like, you have to trust but verify. So if you keep going into your dentist and they keep saying every time you have a cavity, every 6 months, maybe you should go, why is it every 6 months I have a cavity? I don't know. Trust but verify. Ronald Reagan.
I had a friend who many years ago was a chiropractor. And my initial thought is like, oh, gee, I hate chiropractors. I don't like the not the fact that they make adjustments to people's backs. I'm okay with that. But it was like, I've never met a chiropractor or heard someone who goes to a chiropractor who hasn't said like, oh yeah, I've been going there for years. And I'm thinking like, well, are they really doing their job then? Because if you keep coming back, like, it sounds like they're really not fixing the problem. And so I met this guy who was a chiropractor, and he was like, he goes, it's really strange, but the goal of my office is to make people not come back. And I was finally like, oh my gosh, if I ever need a chiropractor, I'm going to go to this guy, because he's actually trying to resolve the underlying problem, not, hey, here's another person I can sign up on a subscription service for the next 5 years.
That's so funny, because my father-in-law, rest his soul, was a neurosurgeon. And he kind of had the same thing about the chiropractors. But I have friends who they swear by their chiropractor. And most of them are like, it's a back tweak and it goes away. And then like maybe a year or two later, they go back. So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, you got to trust yourself. Yeah.
We'll get off that tangent. We don't want to disparage any more chiropractors.
No.
So what are so we talked about the kind of the ways to spot, the Maserati shows up in the parking lot for the frontline accountant. They're not going on vacation. They're super control freaks over the accounting. Are there processes that small businesses can set up to also help, as opposed to looking for the pink signs?
Yeah. So one of the easiest things, and these are all very inexpensive, if not free, sort of tweaks. If you're a small business owner, mail your bank statements home or to a PO box only you can control. Now you're kind of like, I don't want to mail my bank statements home. You know how easy it is with computers these days to make a bank statement look like $1 million instead of 12,000? Really easy. You need to be the first person to open your bank statement. And some people are like, well, I download my bank statement. Well, do you actually look at the image of the check? So I had this other client who I call it the fat finger caper. She wrote out checks, and one was like, $2,500 to ABC Corporation and $3,000 to XYZ Corporation. And so she's going through her online bank account and she sees $2,500, $3,000, and she accidentally clicks on view image for the $2,500 one. And she's like, oh, well, it's going to show ABC. No, it showed the outside bookkeeper. And that started the unraveling of a $500,000 theft. So she's on a mission to actually get people in our industry to either request the hard copy checks, which banks don't want to do anymore, or at least to view the images. Because in your mind, you kind of keep a mental tab of what you have. You sell 10 million widgets and you get $1 a widget. In your mind, you're like, I got $10 million in the bank. You're keeping this mental calculation, but you actually validate it. And she wasn't. She was looking at the checks and seeing the dollar amounts, but not looking at the image. So like looking at that. Maybe you tell your accounting people, oh, I only look at checks over $5,000, or they know you only look at checks over $5,000. Mix it up. Say, you know what? I'm going to pull a couple checks under 1,000. And if they think you only look at them at the end of the quarter, mix it up and do it the first of the month. There was a woman in Oregon who stole, I believe it was $800,000 from a municipality, and the municipality had audits. But the auditors only showed up during June and only looked at June. So she stole until May 31st, went cold turkey for a month, and then started up every year, July 1st. Mix it up. Keep them guessing, and that's a freebie. That doesn't cost anything.
Would you recommend things like if you're maybe a little bit more than a small size business, so you have maybe multiple people on your accounting staff, is having kind of random internal audits by different employees, just kind of trust but verify type of processes? Like
absolutely.
In the warehouse business, we used to call it just cycle counts. Yeah, just someone who's not normally in the warehouse, go out and count the locations and make sure they're right.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like you have segregation of duties. So the person who receives the money doesn't deposit the money and doesn't put it into the system. The person who prepares the payroll doesn't approve the payroll. But it's also like, what if you have employees who take vacations, you make sure they take vacations. And there's this term in like the younger generation, microcations, where they're only gone 2 or 3 days. If you're only gone 2 or 3 days, no one's going to do your work for you. They're just going to expect you to work longer when you get back and get caught up. But if you're gone 2 weeks, most businesses can't have you not do your job for 2 weeks. And so people come in and they look at the stuff and they have to do it. So that sort of cross training and knowing, what someone does. I've met this person recently through a mastermind, and she's a documentation expert. And when I first met her, I was like, that is genius, because I've always had this sort of hit by the bus book wherever I've worked, where I delineate all my responsibilities daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. So if I got hit by a bus, someone could come in, immediately pull out the book and know what needs to be done. She does this, for her job. And I think it's genius, because then you know where everything is. And it's not just sitting in someone's head.
Yeah. Like that's what I always worry about with, like, if I know some small business people who own small businesses who they just live it, like they don't use accounting software. It's just the checkbook. And I'm just like, it frightens me.
You can't do that. Oh my God. Yeah. You can't do it for a lot of reasons, but, and you get a lot of businesses. Oh, well, big checks have to have 2 signatures. Again, number one way people embezzle is forged or unauthorized checks. I know this woman. I have, I call them my felon friends or my prison pen pals. And I talk to these, the prison pen pals are women, because I don't do male prison pen pals. That would be a bad thing. But I talked to this one woman, and she worked for a business, incredibly successful business. And when she embezzled, she signed the vice president's signature all day long. She could never sign the older brother who was the president's signature, because she just couldn't get his signature down. But she goes, I could sign the VP's signature all day long. Oh,
that's scary.
Yeah.
So you think you're the counter signing the check, and you're only signing the checks over $10,000, but you might have someone in the back office adding an extra zero, or not even showing you the check.
Right. Yeah. And she also said that, like, she knew certain times of the month like the business owner would be rushed. And that's when she'd just slide in an extra check because at the bottom of the pile, my dad used to have this thing in his checkbook. If he didn't want his girlfriend to see that he wrote a check, he like hid it in the bottom of the checks. Like she would just go through the tops, but he would like pull a check out, like check number 48 out of 50, because she wouldn't even notice that it was there. And so that's, there are little things like that you can do to hide it. And, business owners aren't going to go through the checkbook. Someone said to me, I have some pre-signed checks in my safe for when I'm on, a business trip. If there's an emergency, they can go in there. I'm like, so when's the last time you looked at them? Are they all there? Do you have a register of when they were written and why? And you could just see his eyes like glaze over like, oh my God, I've never actually looked to see if any of them have been used. And he hadn't.
The blood just rushes out of his face.
Yeah, I can kind of clear out a cocktail party pretty darn quickly with them rushing back to their offices with going, oh my God, I got to check those checks. I got to see. And signature stamps. People used to use signature stamps. Mm-hmm. It's like, no one these days should use a signature stamp. But, there are people, it's like, I don't want to sign all those checks. And it's, well, you also don't want to have to hire me. I'm not trying to not get people to hire me, but I would rather have people hire me on the front end. I'm a lot cheaper on the front end than I am on the back end. What is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure or something like that. Like if we have to come in on the back end, it's much worse.
Yeah.
Let us come in on the front end and help you about processes.
So do you train on the front end and then investigate on the back end, so to speak, as two sides of your business?
Yep. And I do that. I don't do as many investigations anymore just because I'm so busy speaking about it. And I would much rather go to a group of business owners or auditors or CPAs and train a group of them to go out and look for these things or to put these processes in effect instead of sitting across the table from someone and say, okay, you stole, tell me about it. Like that's kind of whack-a-mole versus when you're training and teaching and writing about it, you're affecting a much bigger audience. And I kind of think it's better.
So what is the silliest embezzlement case that you've dealt with? Or either silliest or strangest?
Well, the woman who stole $450,000, who the guy thought it was only $400, I kind of put that up there with one of the craziest ones that I've been personally involved with because, so he was a doctor, but not, he also had a business, a winery vineyard, and he hired this woman, her name was Tiffany, and this is all public record, and he said he never liked her, so he never gave her access to his checkbook. But she quit on him kind of abruptly, and he noticed two purchases at like Staples and Target for $400. Oh, he was so angry. And so he calls the local deputy, and they come out, and he writes a report for $400. Well, then we start looking at it, and it's $450,000. And he comes in, and I said, so you know how she stole? He's like, I have no idea. He goes, I never gave her access to my checkbook. And I said, well, she refunded on the Visa machine all day long. And he looks at me and he goes, I have a wine tasting room. You taste the wine, and if you like it, you buy it. I would never be giving refunds. And I said, well, she refunded to the tune of $450,000. He never even looked at the possibility that she could refund.
Wow.
And he was gobsmacked. And the interesting thing about it was she quit, he didn't catch her, till afterwards. And he was so mad that she would steal $400 from him. Well, wait till when he found out $450,000 from him. And she actually got sentenced to, I believe it was 78 months. It was her first arrest and conviction, but she had done it before. So this is another sort of tip is if someone starts at a business, and if they steal within the first 6 months of being there, they've done it before. Now, they might not have a criminal history. That's the other thing. According to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, only 4% of fraudsters have criminal histories. Why is that? Because the business owners don't want to deal with it.
It's
like
that
they just fire them.
It's easier to fire the person and move on as opposed to come public, admit that someone stole from me, go through the police reports, go through all the hassle.
Yeah. And I hate to say it, and maybe some of your audience will identify this. A business might, quote, have 2 sets of books. And so you think an audit is bad? What if you have to hand over your real set of books to the law enforcement? I call it the get out of jail free card. And I had a woman who stole from a business. And when she got caught, she was confronted by the business owner and attorney. Don't ever do these cases on your own. So if you came into your house, Chris, and you saw a dead body, what would you do?
I'd call the police.
Okay. You wouldn't touch the body.
No, heck no. I've watched too many episodes of CSI and Dateline.
Yeah, exactly. But when a business owner finds embezzlement, do they call the police? And do they not touch the body? Oh, God, no. They touch the body. They mess up the crime scene. They get in the computer. These are not DIY investigations. And I'll just give you one quick example. Chipotle falsely accused one of their store managers of stealing $680 some. And they said they had her on camera with her hands in the safe. Well, it was retaliation. And Chipotle ended up paying $8 million for falsely accusing her of theft. So if you falsely accuse an employee of theft, you're messing with their life and their liberty. And if you falsely accuse them, and it's a world of hurt. Again, you wouldn't go in and touch a dead body. Don't go in and touch a crime scene.
That's really good advice.
Yeah. Well,
but I think lots of people just I think there's an aspect of it that makes, in some weird sense, makes sense to me as a small business person. It's just kind of like, well, let me just tinker and see what really happened and try to figure it out. Like before, because it's that I don't want people to know that I lost, and maybe it really wasn't that bad. Let me just start poking around and see for myself.
Yeah. So I'm writing a book. Well, actually, it's at the editors. And I kind of say embezzlement is like porn. And the reason I'm writing the book is to get the word out and have people, there's going to be a checklist and tips and, examples. But you're not going to go into Barnes and Noble and say, I've been ripped off. Where's the books on embezzlement? It's kind of like porn in the fact that you're going to surf online and you're going to type into the magic Google, my office manager is stealing. And they're going to find me that way. Because again, you're not going to, it's kind of like, what's the book 50 Shades of Grey when it came back? People loved it on Kindle because you didn't want to have people see that you're reading 50 Shades of Grey. Well, that's kind of like my book will be, because you're not going to carry the book in, Embezzlement 101 and have your employees see it. They will freak out. So that's why I say it's a little bit like porn. So it'll be a downloadable also book that, people won't see you carrying in the scarlet E for embezzlement.
It's funny because I was thinking about it from the opposite perspective in that, and maybe you can tell me from your experience, it's like from a lot of the cases that I've heard about embezzlement, that it usually starts with a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there, and the numbers just slowly grow over time, that it's usually not, hey, there was this one-time transaction of $500,000. It's 500 transactions of $1,000.
Absolutely. It starts small, and it snowballs, and they never stop. They don't pay it back. And another thing is they confess. So when you do find out that it happens, you need to have your ducks in a row to capture that confession. And you don't want to do it. You need to have a witness, meaning a good lawyer, to do it. There's also, you can't say, if you pay me back $57,000 that I think you stole, I won't go to the police. That's extortion.
Mm-hmm. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah. So there's a lot of nuances. Again, it's not just about the money. And I hate to say it because, I hate to hire lawyers. It's the 6-minute increment. But you need professional help. Like, this is not a DIY, because you really can get yourself in a lot of trouble. And one of the other things, I had a woman reach out to me recently. She had gotten my name, and she reported an embezzlement, and the cop called her back and he said, that's a civil matter. And a lot of times I get hired to be kind of that liaison between the victim and law enforcement, because I know I was in law enforcement. I know what they need. And you can liaison between the two, and you kind of have to sell it and educate law enforcement sometimes about how it was done. Cops do not become cops to play with Excel. They become cops to shoot things and drive fast cars. Like, so there's the nuances of that. And so she was just like, is this a civil matter? I'm like, no, it's not a civil matter. But in this case, this was an outside sort of bookkeeper who kept the dollar amounts small enough that the cops had no interest. Now, if you steal a bunch of money, yeah, the cops are going to have interest. But if you steal like $10,000 or $12,000 from 5 different businesses in like 3 different jurisdictions, the cops aren't talking to each other, and they're going to say, oh, that's civil, and go away. And a lot of business owners will say, oh, well, it was only $10,000. I'm not going to hire a lawyer and hire Kelly, and that's another $20,000. You're not going to throw good money after bad.
Yeah, that's the same sort of thing that I see with people that have fallen victim to like romance scams, and they send the scammer the money. The police are like, yep, the amount of money is too small. We're not interested. It's international. We can't help you. Have a nice day.
Yeah, one of the first cases I worked as a fraud analyst for the local sheriff's office, it was a guy who like went around and kind of did fundraisers. He was a professional grifter. He would go from town to town, and he would do just enough that no police department had an interest. But that's the thing, is like, cops talk to each other. And so we had this sort of alliance, and all of a sudden we could see that this guy was out in this county, and he was in this county, and was in this city. And we were able to put together a big case because we sat down and we shared information.
Yeah, that seems to be almost like the theme here is like, the more people that have access to the information, the less likely it's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's an insidious crime that happens way more than you ever think about it. My husband goes on a dude trip, pre-COVID, of course. And when he talks to like new people who come with this group, and he says what I do, they're just like kind of gobsmacked, and it's like, oh, that happened to my sister. Oh, that happened to my family. Or it's just like, again, hashtag the relatable crime. We don't relate to Bernie Madoff because he didn't live with us. These are people we see in our grocery stores. I have a doctor who direct messages me on Twitter, and he or she, I don't know which because it's, anonymous. And they're like, I see the perpetrator in the grocery store, and it just kills me. That's the other thing, is there is no CSI embezzlement. These cases take a really long time, and people get incredibly frustrated. They're just, the woman who lost, close to $500,000. She waited a year for an indictment, a year. And now this is on year 2, just negotiating back and forth between her and the police. And so they're kind of gutted. And there's so the podcast where I listen to a victim, then there's another podcast I listen to another victim. And one of the things that is really, unfortunately, very consistent is the victims are very, I could say, disappointed in the criminal justice system. They don't feel that there's enough punishment. They feel it takes too long. They feel that they've had to pay a lot of money to have it investigated themselves. They're really very disillusioned, maybe not disappointed, but disillusioned in the system, because we want to think that when someone does something wrong, that they're held accountable. Well, if you go to law enforcement with a dead body or a serial rapist, they're going to put their resources on that. If you're a big profitable company and you get $100,000 stolen, a lot of times law enforcement is just going to say, you know what, we've got bigger fish to fry. And law enforcement has limited resources. And do taxpayers want a Fortune 100 company that, can't seem to put in the proper internal controls to investigate their cases? Or do they want someone to investigate, a gang or a serial rapist or a burglar? They want their money to go to that. They're like, it's kind of like Bernie Madoff. We don't feel sorry for his victims, which is totally wrong. But it's just limited resources.
Yeah, that is a huge challenge. And again, it's the same thing that I run across with people that have fallen victim to online scams. It's their loss is so small compared to, the murder down the street, the assault, and the amount of effort that it's going to take the police to get a resolution.
And I mean, with like the people that you talk to that they've had like the romance scams or, the other type of, I'm going to say smaller scams, they talk about it nonstop, don't they?
Yep.
Because they're hurt. They're hurt. They're also embarrassed. I mean, there's a lot of elderly parents out there that are too embarrassed to tell their children that they have sent money to a Nigerian prince.
Yeah, it based on the emails that I get, these sort of things happen way more. And they're definitely, I don't want anyone to know. I don't want to talk about this publicly. I don't want it, I just want to email you, and I've done it from an anonymous email address so you can't figure out who I am.
Right. They're just embarrassed. And it's just like, I mean, I don't want to say it's nothing to be embarrassed about, but again, we go back to Ronald Reagan, and he was not my favorite president in any sort. But trust but verify, absolutely trust but verify, and that includes family members. Doing due diligence even on people who come to your home who say you need a new driveway. It's like, we've got this amazing thing. It's called the Google, and use the Google. And I would say and maybe this is a hint or tip for your audience, is put the phone number in. Like, that's one of the easiest things to do, is because we track each other by our phones these days more so than emails. If you get someone who comes up after a natural disaster, put in that phone number. You'll never know what can pop up.
Yeah, there's all sorts of interesting things happen when you start Googling people that you're interacting with. I had received a letter that looked like it was a government letter, had a seal on them. Oh, let me take a look at this. And it was, hey, the state of California requires you to post these mandated employment signs in your employee break room. And I'm a sole proprietor. I'm the only person for my company, so I don't think I need to stick them up in my own bathroom at home. But I was just kind of curious, and I Googled the company and looked them up on Yelp, and they had like 1,000 one-star reviews at Yelp. Because what would happen is the person would call up and, hey, I'm interested in the $25, here's my signs. And they'd get a really high pressure upsell to a bigger package. They would say, no, I don't want it. I just want the $25 package. And they'd get charged for the higher dollar package. And it was just one review after another. And when they tried to get their refunds, it was profanities. And I was like, oh my gosh, I would never do business with this company. But that's the kind of 30 seconds of due diligence led me down this rabbit hole of these stories of how this company behaved. I'm like, okay, never do business with them. Yeah,
absolutely. There's another thing. There's not a national database, much as everyone thinks Big Brother can track us all. There's not a national database that like the FBI has of arrests and convictions all over the country. So, you can have an arrest and not be convicted.
Yeah.
And so people think that you just put that in, you're a private investigator. You can just access that. I'm like, no, I need to know everywhere they've lived. You have to, because there's some small little towns that don't feed into the, it's called NCIC. And so people think that Big Brother is tracking us all, but there's a lot of things that they're not very good at. And that's one of the things that they're not very good at, is having a database of that.
Mm-hmm. So as we wrap up here, if people want training for their office on how to protect themselves from embezzlement, or they've been a victim of embezzlement, Are you interested in dealing with them and talking with them and helping them out?
Absolutely. The easiest way to get a hold of me is to go to the pinkcollarcrime.com website, or you can go to kellypaxton.com website. I'm also on LinkedIn, just Kelly Paxton. I'm on Twitter too. I post stories. I do a Friday Fraudster, and I post a lot of embezzlement type stories, and it's just kind of interesting to follow. So I'm absolutely, if you have a question, reach out to me. I will always be willing to take calls.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Kelly.
And thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Prey podcast. If you like this episode, help support the podcast and our mission by leaving a review at easyprey.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Kelly Paxton can be found at easyprey.com/36.